On this page there's a bunch of information relevant to us tutors. However, I've made this video to go through it and discuss it as well. Basically, this video is the same as the text below. The overall objective is to get pupils as good a result as possible in their GCSE or A-level exams. The objective on any one given lesson is to improve the student's understanding and confidence of the subject as much as possible in that hour, or whatever time frame the lesson is. If possible, we should leave the students feeling good about themselves and about the subject. Learning can be a slow and overwhelming process. It certainly was for me. Was, still is. So we need to be respectful of that and show patience where necessary. Tutors need to have a good understanding of the course material, obviously. Pupils can ask any questions about any subject at any time, and the more familiar we are with the course material, the more we'll be able to help them. Generally, in a classroom environment, you plan the lessons in advance, so you kind of know what you're going to be looking at. Whereas in online tutoring, you're going to be helping them with their specific needs, wherever that goes. So yeah, you want to fully understand the course as much as you can. If we know in advance what topics they're going to ask us about or struggling with, then we can make sure we're up to date with those subjects. And we tutors need to have the same textbooks as a pupil and access to practice papers, which we can provide access to the practice papers. Engagement. Online tutoring is basically a conversation between tutor and student. And ultimately, the student should be doing at least 51% of the talking. Unlike in conventional lessons, where the students spend most of the time sat listening. The student should also be doing over 51% of the writing and calculating on the collaborative whiteboard. We don't know in advance how much they know, so we rarely flat out tell them something such as Pythagoras theory is blah blah blah. Instead, we might ask, do you remember what Pythagoras is, what Pythagoras theorem is, and then we take it from there. If they know, we move on. If they don't know, we go over that. Each microsection that we teach, we should immediately test to see if they understand it, generally working on the assumption that they do not understand it until they prove otherwise. Strategy. We often end up working on two separate topics simultaneously. Firstly, if they're struggling on the topic that they're currently working on in school, it's good to invest some time working on that, because then, instead of them being sat in the school, in the classroom, not understanding the material, feeling like their time has been wasted, they can get more out of their school lessons, as well as getting stuff out of the one-to-one tuition. This is the first stage of what we call the cumulative snowball effect. Secondly, we should be working on topics, starting from the basics, making sure they understand the foundation stages. We can then sweep through the syllabus from the foundation all the way up to the more advanced material and make sure they understand all the components. So you have following through the course material on one side, and you have helping them with their school topics on the other side. If it's near the exam time, then it may well be best to spend a lot of time on exam practice and strategy. So the snowball effect I talked about. So the first step is working on topics that the pupil is struggling with in school, so they can understand what their teacher is saying, so they can get more out of the lessons, as well as getting stuff out of one-to-one. Step two is just to generally increase their confidence and enjoyment of maths or physics. So they are more likely to spend time on their homework and more time learning that subject. Preemptive teaching. So, for example, if a student wanted to know about where the quadratic formula is derived from, before diving into the meat of that question, it might be worth considering briefing them up on the basic, rearranging, completing the square, adding algebraic fractions, power laws. Otherwise, whilst deriving the quadratic formula, we're likely to keep ending up stopping the flow to explain those little individual components I just talked about. And it's going to mean they're not really going to be focusing on the deriving the quadratic formula. It's going to be too many things going on. And this is something you'll get with more experience, when to not directly answer the question when to go back on to make sure they're familiar with the basics, but it's something well worth looking out for right from the beginning of your tutoring career. Hopefully to an extent it will come naturally as tutors gain experience. However, during our training sessions and lesson reviews, we will be looking out for opportunities to make better use of this technique. Teaching style. In Morgan Tuition, our job is not to force the children to take part in the lessons or to force them to do homework. Our job is to work with the children to help them get better grades. If the children are not prepared to engage in the lessons, I will speak to the parents, and either we will resolve the problem and find a way to motivate the student, or we will conclude that we are not the right tutoring agency for that student. There are tutoring agencies and tutors who do discipline and motivation, etc., which is great, but definitely not our specific style. If a child mainly needs crowd control and motivation, then there are other tutoring agencies which will be much better suited to their needs than us. Our aim is to motivate through engagement, through results, not through discipline. Having said that, it's perfectly okay to tell a student what we want, like please don't use your phone during this lesson, etc. Try to keep on top of the student's state. If they need to have a 2-minute brain break in the middle of the lesson, that's often a good idea and can mean you get more productivity out of the last 20 minutes, which can sometimes be a bit dead. If they're making no progress with the subject, maybe leave it and come back to it later. Just generally try and be aware of what's going on with them. Learning style. Every student's learning style is different, and part of our strategy to getting the best results should be analysing their learning process during the lessons. I generally find a large part of this is weighing up between helping them to understand something versus helping them to remember something. Personally, I have a very small memory, so if I want to use something in the future, I'm going to have to understand it, otherwise I will just forget it. Other people find understanding mathematical concepts difficult and would rather just remember it, remember how to get the result in the exam. Student wins. For students to keep doing questions they don't understand is demoralizing. It's important to make sure that all work is interspread with questions they're capable of doing that day. Ideally questions that challenge them a tiny bit, but questions that give them confidence that they can nail it. If, for example, you're going through an exam paper and they keep not knowing the answers to the questions, look at the next question, do all the background prep, and then give the question so they can answer it and feel like it's a win. So you do the prep work not looking at the exam paper, then you do the question on the exam paper and they answer it. They feel like they've answered a question on an exam paper, which is ultimately the objective. Okay, keeping positive. Sometimes tutoring can feel really hard going. So sometimes it's worth taking a micro break if the pupil is churning through a question without any problems. We can take 30 seconds for ourselves. If it feels like a hard lesson, it might be worth reminding ourselves that we are most likely in a warm, comfortable environment, teaching a subject we enjoy, helping someone with something they are struggling with. My point being, it's not exactly coal mining. It's actually a pretty good activity. Appearance. Right, we need to look presentable. We don't have to look like we're dressed for a wedding, but we do need to appear relatively presentable. I know that's not naturally the forte of maths and physics personnel, however, it's important that we don't look like this. Don't look like this. Don't look like you've just gotten out of bed.